February 11th, 2011. It's a sunny day. The wind chill was about minus 20 this morning, but it's looking pretty nice out there now. And we're at Leo and Mary Charleton's home on the east side of Faribault. And our video person is Julie Fox of Fox Productions, who volunteers her talent and has done so for quite a few years. And I'm Dr. Roy Anderson, the one that does the interviewing here. So, Mary, we'll interview you first, and then we'll work with Leo. So, okay. You want to tell us about your early days and your parents?
Okay.
And
all right, to do that. Well, I'll start by introducing my mother and dad. They were William and Rose Minke. My dad was a second-generation German. My mother was a first-generation Austrian. And they met in Finlayson, Minnesota, where when my dad had come up from Jordan, Minnesota to work in a sawmill with his father. They were married in Rutledge in 1922, and then the next day they took the train to Warroad, and they homesteaded land 9 miles south of Warroad. They built their home with a team of horses. It was a second-story frame home, and the land at that time was all covered with peat. It wasn't very good farming land. So one year my dad had to take the train down to Flint, Michigan, and he worked in a plant down there. When he returned, he discovered that my mother had learned how to drive the Model T. And that was a big accomplishment in those days. They attempted my dad attempted to farm again, but after 3 more children, he got a job with the state forestry in south of Baudette, and so they moved there. It was a two-room log cabin, and that's where I was born. I was number 6. They lived there for 13 years. I was a little bit luckier because we moved to town when I was 5, because I used to hear kind of horror stories of the cold and the cramped quarters at that time. My dad's job continued with the forestry, and after we moved to town in 1940, we started to deliver milk. That was the days before pasteurization. And my job was to jump in the car after my dad came home from work and deliver the milk that had been ready the day before. I had to wash, maybe 40 or 50 milk bottles every night. And in the summertime, I could do that outside, and everything was rinsed at that time in a great big wheelbarrow. Let's see here. The war years I remember very vividly because I had one brother who was on the island of Leyte, another brother who was on the front lines in Germany, and then my brother-in-law who was a tail gunner flying over Burma. These were very hard years on my mother, and I can still remember being up in the bedroom listening to her crying and sobbing. Luckily, they all came home safely, and I still remember one of my brother's dog tag number. My school years, I enjoyed. We were all in one schoolroom in Baudette, 1 through 12. I was a good student, I think. I had good penmanship. I was also a very stubborn child, and I did get into trouble at times. At home, they called me the Stier, because in German, stubborn is stierisch. So they just started calling me the Stier. And my dad was kinder. I was the first one born with brown eyes, so he called me the Schwarze one. I started playing the clarinet when I was in the 6th grade, and because it was a small school, I was able to play in senior band. So for 7 years I did play in senior band. I loved my clarinet, and we played at all the basketball games, of course, and we did some marching. We competed in the spring festivals, which were usually held in a neighboring town. That was kind of a big treat for us. And I was also a piano accompanist when I was in senior high. Music was a priority in my home and at school. In fact, in our log cabin, we had a big upright piano. I don't know where it was, but it was there. Other activities in school that I had, school plays, yearbook, cheerleading. It's a real advantage to being in a small school because everyone is really involved there. When I was around 15 or 16, my friends and I decided to go to the country dances. Only a few boys had cars at that time, so we would all pile into a car and head out into the country after the stores and liquor store had closed, of course. None of us were really drinkers. I knew that a few of them smoked, but we did see a lot of drinking at the country dances, and I think that a lot of Mr. Jim Beam was probably passed behind the two holers. I liked to watch the older people dance. They were good at doing the schottische and the polkas and the butterfly. We all had to do the butterfly. I knew I wanted to go to school, but I wasn't sure how that was going to be managed. But my sister and her husband had recently bought a store across from the College of St. Catherine, and she suggested that I live with them and go to school, which I was allowed to do. So I did live with them for 2.5 years. Removing myself from a small Minnesota town, northern Minnesota town, and going to live in a city was very traumatic. It put me in a different world. At that time, there were a lot of really good Catholic schools. The Catholic school system was very strong in St. Paul at that time, and a lot of these girls would come over to St. Kate's and bring all their friends. And because I didn't live on campus, and I didn't live on, or I wasn't from St. Paul, I really didn't fit in. And it was very lonely the first year, but I do appreciate the people at that time who did open up their homes to me, so I wasn't cut off completely. Mm-hmm. Music was always my strong point, so I decided to major in music. But now I was competing with girls that probably had been brought up listening to Bach and Beethoven and Chopin, and my experience was probably on the radio with the Six Fat Dutchmen or the Happy Gang out of Winnipeg, CKRC Winnipeg. So after my first year, I decided that maybe music wasn't going to be my field, and I did switch to elementary education. But my sophomore year in college, I did have a moment of fame. I auditioned into the Schubert Club in St. Paul, and that gave me the opportunity to play with the 10-panner group at Northrop Auditorium at the University of Minnesota campus. And my sister, knowing that I was going to be playing there, bought me a pair of candelabra earrings for the occasion anyway. My biggest influence, I think, in college was my piano teacher, who was also a violinist, and she helped me through some very, very rough times. She she just became a very good friend. I considered her my psychologist. And that, plus the academic excellence that I received there, I think prepared me for a career in the teaching profession, my role as a future mother and wife, and hopefully a good role model in the community. My first teaching job was in Austin, Minnesota, at Nevlin Elementary in the east side of Austin. These 2 years couldn't have been better. There were older ladies, older teachers there that took me under their wing, and they became my friends until they passed away. We just kept in contact with one another. So it was a great 2 years of teaching there. And then in the summer of 1958, I was home. It was Minnesota Centennial, and I met my future husband at the hometown bar and cafe. I had previously met him at a dance when I was about a junior, I think, in high school. And then we started dating right away. And by Christmas time, I was engaged. We were married in August of 1959. At that time, Leo had a job with the airlines, with North Central Airlines. He had been working in Duluth, and he transferred up to International Falls. So that was our first home. About a month before we were married, there was a knock on the door at my home in Badette, and it was the priest from International Falls. And he says, "I hear that you are going to be living in the Falls." And he says, "We need a first grade teacher at St. Thomas." So I agreed to teach at St. Thomas. I had 42 first graders.
42?
42 of them, yes. But I was lucky. I had an old German nun across the hallway, so she kept things pretty well in balance. And at the end of the school year, I had just one who really could not read. But I think that's about all we did. If I can remember correctly, just read.
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks after school, after the first year, I had a baby. And a year later, my first baby was Joseph, and a year later I had Paul. We were comfortable. We were renting a nice little home on 9th Street in International Falls. We had good neighbors, and I was a very busy mom. In spite of more family that we had in International Falls, Leo had a sister there and her family, and a brother and his family, and also some high school friends. Leo decided to take a position down in Bemidji. He was still with the airlines.
Is that North Central?
North Central Airlines, yes. And what was your position there? He was a station agent there, so he took care of all the duties that it entails. We rented a 3-bedroom home the first year, and then we bought our first home on Lake Boulevard, which faced Lake Bemidji. It was a nice older home. We did some nice things to it. And then we had 4 more children. David was born in 63, Jean 64, Peter in 67, and Anne in 68. I don't remember much what was happening in the 60s. And I just tell people that I think I was unconscious for 10 years. The kids were the focus, definitely the focus. But they were very good years. I was busy, and I could tuck the kids in bed at night, and it was a very happy time. In the fall of 67, after a good deal of thought, Leo left the airlines to attend school. We were just 2 blocks away from Bemidji College, and he was able to draw on the GI Bill, and he worked at the airport doing custodial work and also taking weather observations. I think maybe the stress level was a little higher, although I did make sure we had extra desserts. And after he started working, or going to school, excuse me, there were 2 more children on the way, so it was still a good decision. He was being successful in school and another growing part in our lives. In 1971, he accepted a position of initiating an industrial arts program at the Faribault State Hospital, which became the regional center. And so we moved down here. I believe it was the 1st of July in 71. It was a very, very difficult move, especially for the kids because they really missed their lake. They had spent hours and hours during the summer playing down at the lake. And so that was a little tough on them. And of course, I was alone. I didn't know anyone down here. I had left behind family and friends. But the school helped. Starting school helped with the kids were busy, and we settled in with home and school activities. At that time, finances were a little tough, so I was doing some babysitting, and most of these kids would come home with my kids after school, and I would take care of them until their mothers came home. In 1975, I interviewed for a job, a Title I position in the school, and because I had let my teaching certificate lapse, I went in as an aide over in Garfield, and after 2 years I renewed my license and started as a teacher, a teaching position in the Title I program, and that was my profession until I retired in 1999. It was a wonderful experience. I was with some master teachers over at McKinley, although I did teach in other schools too. And I'll never forget how caring they were toward their students. After retirement, Leo and I agreed that if we were going to travel, we better do it now. Well, we felt good. And so we did start. Our first overseas trip was over to Ireland. That was Leo's heritage. And 2 years later, we went to Austria. That was my heritage. And we've been to a few other countries. Spain. Our one daughter moved to Uruguay with her family, so we took a couple trips down to Uruguay. They moved to Brazil, and we were down there. And a day's trip into Argentina. And our oldest now lives in Mexico, so we have made several trips down there. And also, I traveled down to Mexico with the VOSH organization and helped out a little bit there. We've also gone in elder hostels, which I highly recommend. We've been to the Southwest, to the West, and to Alaska. I think we always stressed education to our kids and felt it was a priority, and we were happy when they all pursued education after high school, and I'm going to introduce them to you a little bit now. Our oldest, Joe, has a degree in cellular and molecular biology. He's living in Mexico with his wife, Norma, who is an administrator at a university there, and they have a 6-year-old a little girl named Jasmine, who is a first grader. Our Paul, the happy bachelor, loves the outdoors and earned a degree in forestry. He lives in Shoreview, and he works for Quest. Number 3 son, David, whom we call Dixie, graduated with a degree in math and chemistry, and his wife Julie now is attending South Central at the present, and soon will have her accounting degree. Jean has an AA in horticulture, and it was there in Waseca where she met her husband, Jan, and they have a hog farm production in around the Lake City, Goodhue area. They have a daughter who is 18 today. She will be graduating this spring from Goodhue. Peter has a degree in business and lives with his wife Pam about 10 miles north of Faribault here, Northfield address. Pam teaches in Northfield and Peter works down in Owatonna. They have 4 children. Stephanie, who is a sophomore at Mankato. Isabella, who is a 5th grader at St. Dominic's. Joshie is 2nd grader, and Isaac is kindergarten. Annie has a degree in elementary ed and psychology. She's married to Craig and has 3 boys. They live in Olathe, Kansas, and their boys are Kyle, 7th grader, Connor, 5th grader, and Zachy, who is Zachy would be about 8 here. Yeah. We always have good get-togethers when we are together. We aren't always able to always get together, but everyone usually pitches in for the big occasions, and with the grandchildren around, we have a good and exciting time. Last year was our 50th, and we celebrated with an open house at the Elks. The kids organized it, and it definitely was a proud and delightful celebration. At the present time, volunteering keeps me busy. I enjoy my volunteering jobs. I'm out at the gift shop at the hospital, at the clothes closet, playing for the seniors sometimes when they have their lunch, and working at funerals. And what could be better than having friends over for a good meal once in a while? I try to play the piano every day. Knit a little. I always have a good book at hand. We're in good health, and I love to be outside, even in this cold weather. And as far as getting a little philosophical here, I've always tried to be grateful for all the good things that have happened in my life, and even in the painful times, it helps with humility a little bit. It also has opened other doors. I love to laugh, and I found life is more exciting when you can think outside the box. Thanks for listening.
Wow, nice job.
Starting part 2, and Leo's going to finish up for us, so
Okay.
you can lead off here.
Okay. Well, regarding my parents and how the surname came about, well, my dad was born in Minto, North Dakota, and his parents came over from England originally, and they come down through Canada and settled in North Dakota. And my mother was born over in Stephen, Minnesota, which isn't too far across the Dakota line there. So both more or less northwest Minnesota is where they're from there. Mm-hmm. And in the early years, well, to begin with, I was born in Williams, Minnesota, right in the house there. The doctor was Dr. Brink. He came from Baudette, Minnesota. And that's where my wife was from also. In fact, he delivered my wife and also me a few years later. But he came to the house about midnight, I guess. And I was born at 6:30 in the morning, and then he finally got to go home. And I have the canceled check for it. And he wrote the check, my dad wrote the check in pencil, and it was for $35.
There all night.
Yeah, you were there all night, and that was $35. Okay, as far as school, sports, and extracurricular activities, well, I was involved in hockey mainly as far as sports, and I played 4 years of that. And while I was on the team, I was more or less on the bottom end of it for about 3 years. The class of boys ahead of me, they were more or less the stars. and we went to the state hockey tournament 3 years in a row. And the first 2 years we were state hockey runners-up. Eveleth always beat us out. But in the third year, we went there, but we didn't do anything. All sophomores on the team for the most part, except for myself and one other guy that was a senior. So it was a good experience, and they treated us just royally down in St. Paul. They put us up in the St. Paul Hotel, and coming down from up in Williams, Minnesota, that was really an experience. And
Tell us about that, what you just related about 20 below zero, how you handled that.
oh, well, 20 below, that was kind of a normal thing in the wintertime. But once in a while, it would get to be 40 below. And but it was actually really beautiful out then. There was never any wind, and you'd walk outside, and the snow would just have like kind of crystals on it, and just sparkle. It was really a beautiful thing to be out there, but you didn't want to be out too long. and you didn't want to try to get a car started that had been sitting out all night. The people that had to get their cars going in the morning, that was before the time of plugging them in, and they would usually rent a space down at the garage and keep them in the service garages downtown. And so they had assured their cars would go in the morning. And okay, well, as far as how I met my wife, and well, being a hockey player, I used to go over to the basketball games when there was nothing else going on, and just happened to talk with the cheerleaders once in a while. And this one time we were playing Badette in basketball, and there was a couple of girls come out there afterwards. We were just hockey players, were standing around outside, just outside the gym, and we were just BSing. And they got and started talking with her, and so I got to know her a little bit then. And I never run across her again until later in life. And I was just down. Let's see. This friend of mine was on a 4th of July, and this friend of mine, we didn't know what we were going to do with each other on the 4th of July. There was nothing going on. So we just took a ride down to Badette and see what was going on down there. And we went into the place. It was really a little restaurant, but they had a beer thing connected with it. They called it Al's Place. And we were going in. There was a bunch of the gals from Williams were there, and just happened to be a couple of girls from Badette there too. And so the girls from Williams left, and we were sitting there talking to these two girls from Badette. And so we got talking with them and everything. And eventually I ended up making a date with one for the next night. And so, of course, being the age I was, I kind of burned the candle at both ends, and I was always tired out. And that evening, when I told my mother, I didn't tell my mother I had a date that evening, and I laid down on the sofa after supper and taking a little nap, and I woke up, and it was 7 o'clock, and I said, "Oh, I got to be in Badette." Oh, she said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And I forget exactly what the time was, but anyway, it was awful close to the time I was supposed to meet my wife there, my girlfriend at the time, for the date there. And I got down there. I was going to meet her. She was playing the piano at the school on a program. It was for the 4th of July there. And she had waited just about the full extent she was going to wait. And she was just coming out of the school as I pulled up. So I almost missed her. But luckily, I made it there. And that's where our association first got underway, and it materialized from there. We ended up getting married a few years later. But, as far as my children, we have 6 children, 4 boys and 2 girls. We got our oldest is Joseph, next is Paul, and then is David and Jean, and we'll get mixed up here now. And Peter and Ann.
I interject a little story about Paul.
Okay.
I was a scoutmaster of Troop 309 at 1st English, and whenever we went camping, if there was fishing involved, Paul was going to be there.
Yes.
And one time in the Boundary Waters, it was towards the end of the week, and we were running low on food, and I told the boys that it was probably going to be crackers for the next day or so, and I said, go out and get some fish, otherwise it's going to be those crackers. And they fanned out across the lakes, and that night we had about 25 northerns, and we ate fish for the next 4 or 5 meals because we couldn't. There was no refrigeration, so we had to eat a lot of fish.
Yeah.
So he was such a dedicated fisherman and sportsman. Okay, Leo, go ahead.
Okay. Well, as far as my hobbies, main hobbies have been woodworking, hunting, and fishing. And talking about fishing, well, I grew up right by Lake of the Woods there, and my neighbor, he always would go out fishing on Sundays in the summer, and he'd always invite me to go along too, and so I got in on some really good walleye fishing. It was really, really good fishing, and that's when the limit was 9 fish, and we would usually have our limit every time we went out. But I didn't like to clean fish. And to start with, my mother was cleaning them. And finally she said, well, if you're going to keep on catching them, she said, you've got to start cleaning them. And so I finally had to learn to flay fish. And I didn't know enough to throw them back in. But I really enjoyed good fishing up there. It was really good. And as far as hunting, well, I usually hunted, as far as small game, partridge, which was ruffed grouse, and also sharp-tailed grouse. And then deer hunting was the major activity in the fall there, and always enjoyed the deer hunting. I always tried to get in all 9 days of the season if I could. And it was good hunting. The fishing and hunting, and it was really enjoyable. And now woodworking, I did a little bit of that in high school, and I got to like it. And so when it come time to go to college, I didn't know what my area would be, and I thought, well, I'll start out and see, and then I'll try to make a decision. But I always leaned towards like industrial education, and so I ended up going industrial education with wood as the main interest there. And also, as far as service organization, I belong to the Knights of Columbus and Kiwanis also, and I enjoy both of those there. And I guess, let's see here, what am I missing here? I think that pretty well covers it.
Your employment at
Okay, employment?
regional center.
Okay. Yeah, when I was at the regional center, they hired me to be an industrial arts teacher in the area of woods. And so I got into that because I had taken a course where they dealt with for elementary education in industrial arts. And so I applied that to the residents out there at the state hospital. And it really went over quite well. And then from there, they got another teacher in to take over that, and I took over what they called the working program. We had a work activity center, and we run that where the people would come in and work, and they were paid for the work they did, and it was sorting items or simple assembly, and but they were paid for their work they did there. And so I was in that, and I was managing that for quite a few years, and then towards the end they were changing things around. They asked me if I wanted to go back into teaching and go back into the shop work, and I said sure, I'd enjoy it. So I finished things out back in the shop area, and we were at that time manufacturing items. It was a work program for the residents, and we were making things out of wood, like wall plaques and this, where they give people plaques for working and that. So we made like the shape of Minnesota and had the plaque put on that. But it was fun working with the residents, and I had one resident especially that he more or less adopted me, and he was my right-hand man. He was pretty capable too, but he was deaf, and but he and we could communicate through motions, but we really got along well. And I still see him to this day. I just visited him not too long ago, but it was a interesting and enjoyable job as far as working there at the regional center.
visiting your family is quite a
That's a chore too.
chore,
It keeps me busy.
pleasant chore, but
Yeah, no, we enjoy visits with the kids.
okay, what about any advice for other folks? Their philosophy of life that you'd want to comment on at all?
No, I think I more or less just take my own.
I see.
Let other people determine their own. I think.
One day at a time.
Yeah.
Huh? Okay, I know Kiwanis has a lot of good projects
Yeah,
that
it's-
they work in. And I always thought it was nice how the local boys, Jeff McBreen and Mike Mays and your son Paul and John Hoven and our son David and have kept in touch in the Twin Cities over the years.
It really is kind of unusual
Yes.
for them to stay fairly tight,
Right.
all these years.
Yeah, they.
Because usually after high school, everybody just kind of goes their own direction. And
But they're in the metro area, most
Yeah.
of them, and so they do get together. So, well, thanks so much, Leo. And we've got a
Okay.
table full of pictures and memorabilia there. We're going to